cringiest thing you've seen a bride and groom do for their wedding? Story 1. I was at this wedding where the couple decided to have a medieval-themed ceremony. Sounds cool, right? Well, it was, until the jousting started. Yes, you heard that right. They had arranged a live jousting match as part of their celebration. The groom, let's call him Greg, was all in, wearing full knight armor. The bride, Sarah, was dressed as a princess, looking both elegant and slightly concerned. Everything was set up in a large open field. There were 2 professional jousters who were supposed to do the show, but Greg, fueled by a few too many pre-wedding beers, decided he wanted to participate. Sarah tried to talk him out of it, but Greg insisted it would be the highlight of the wedding. So Greg mounts a horse, barely able to balance in his armor. The jousting starts, and it goes as badly as you might imagine. Greg manages to stay on the horse for the first round, but on the second, he gets hit square in the chest by the other jouster's lance and goes flying off his horse, landing hard on the ground. Sarah screamed, the guests gasped, and Greg lay there, dazed and groaning. Thankfully, he wasn't seriously injured, but he was definitely bruised and his pride took a huge hit. The paramedics were called, and as they were checking him over, Greg muttered, "I just wanted to be her knight in shining armor." Later, as we all sat down for dinner, Greg made a speech, still wincing in pain, saying, "Well, that wasn't exactly the joust I planned, but at least I survived to marry my princess." The crowd laughed, but you could tell Sarah was just relieved it was over. Story 2. At my cousin Emily's wedding, they decided to have an elaborate dance routine for their first dance. Emily and her groom, Mark, had been taking dance lessons for months, and they were really excited to show off their moves. The plan was to start with a slow, romantic waltz that would suddenly switch into a high-energy salsa. The dance started beautifully. Emily looked stunning in her dress, and Mark was confidently leading her across the dance floor. But then came the transition to salsa. As Emily spun into Mark's arms, her heel caught on her dress and she stumbled. Trying to catch her balance, she accidentally elbowed Mark in the face. Hard. Mark staggered back, clutching his nose, which immediately started bleeding. Emily was horrified, and the music awkwardly faded out as guests rushed over to help. Someone handed Mark a napkin, which he held to his nose while trying to reassure Emily that he was fine. They ended up skipping the rest of the dance, and the DJ quickly transitioned into the next part of the evening. Later, with a bandage on his nose, Mark made light of the situation, joking, "At least she didn't break it completely. Just a little love tap." Emily, still blushing, gave him a kiss, and the party continued, but the cringy dance mishap was the talk of the night. Story 3. I once attended a wedding where the groom, Chris, decided to serenade his bride, Lisa, with a love song he had written himself. It was supposed to be a sweet, romantic gesture, but Chris was not exactly a musician. He had been taking guitar lessons for a few weeks and felt confident enough to perform in front of everyone. As he started playing, it became painfully clear that Chris was not ready for this. His fingers fumbled over the chords, and his singing was off-key. Lisa's smile began to waver as she glanced around nervously at the guests, who were trying their best to look supportive. Halfway through the song, Chris hit a particularly bad note and stopped abruptly. There was a moment of awkward silence before someone started clapping, trying to encourage him to continue. Chris, visibly embarrassed, forced a smile and tried to pick up where he left off, but his confidence was shattered. By the time he finished, the room was filled with polite but uncomfortable applause. Lisa hugged him tightly, whispering something in his ear, probably reassuring him it was okay. Later, during the reception, Chris joked about it, saying, "Well, I never claimed to be a rock star, but at least I tried, right?" The guests laughed and the mood lightened, but it was definitely a cringy moment that no one would forget. Story 4. I was at a wedding where the couple decided to have a unity ceremony involving a sand blending ritual. Each of them had a vial of colored sand, which they were supposed to pour together into a larger vase, symbolizing their union. It was a beautiful idea in theory. The problem started when the best man, who was holding the vase, tripped just as the bride and groom were about to pour their sand. He fell forward, and the vase shattered on the ground. The colored sand mixed with the broken glass, creating a mess at the couple's feet. There was an audible gasp from the guests. The bride, Jessica, looked like she was about to cry, and the groom, Tom, was clearly upset. The best man scrambled to pick up the pieces, apologizing profusely. The officiant tried to salvage the moment by saying something about how life can be messy, but love helps us pick up the pieces. It was a nice sentiment, but it didn't quite erase the awkwardness. Later, during the reception, Tom gave a speech where he said, "Well, I guess our marriage is starting off with a bang. But hey, if we can get through this, we can get through anything. Jessica smiled, and everyone cheered, but it was still a cringy start to their life together. Story 5. One of the most cringeworthy things I've ever witnessed at a wedding happened at my friend Amanda's big day. Amanda and her husband Jake decided to write their own vows, which can be a beautiful and personal touch unless it goes horribly wrong. Jake decided to get creative with his vows. Instead of heartfelt promises, he wrote a series of jokes and puns, thinking it would be a fun and unique way to express his love. He started off with, "Amanda, I vow to always find you when you're hiding in the closet, because you know how much I love hide and seek." The guests chuckled, but Amanda's smile was more of a grimace. As he continued, it became clear that his entire speech was filled with cringy humor. "I promise to always let you pick the restaurant, even though you can never decide because, happy wife, happy life, right?" He went on, and while some guests laughed, Amanda looked increasingly uncomfortable. By the end of it, Amanda was visibly holding back tears, and not the happy kind. When it was her turn, she had to take a moment to compose herself. She delivered her vows with genuine emotion, contrasting sharply with Jake's stand-up routine. Later at the reception, Amanda's maid of honor, who was also her sister, pulled Jake aside. I overheard her saying, "You need to fix this. Go talk to her and make it right." Jake spent the rest of the night trying to make it up to Amanda, but the damage was done. It was definitely one of the cringiest wedding moments I've ever seen. Story 6. At my cousin Karen's wedding, they decided to have an open mic segment for guests to share their well wishes and stories. It seemed like a great idea at first, an opportunity for heartfelt moments and some good laughs, but it quickly spiraled into a cringe fest. It started off fine with Karen's college friend reminiscing about their wild dorm days, but then Uncle Bob got up. Uncle Bob, notorious for his long-winded and often inappropriate speeches, took the mic and began recounting Karen's embarrassing childhood moments. "So there was this one time, Karen must have been about 7, when she thought she could swim across the lake, but ended up needing to be rescued by the lifeguard." He laughed heartily, but the crowd's chuckles were more awkward than amused. Karen's face turned beet red. It got worse. Aunt Linda, a bit tipsy, took her turn. "Karen, darling, remember when you had that terrible acne in high school? We all thought you'd never get a boyfriend." She burst into laughter, oblivious to the mortified looks on Karen and her new husband's faces. The final straw was Karen's ex-boyfriend, Steve, who had apparently not moved on. "Karen, I'll never forget our times together. I still think about you all the time. I know we weren't meant to be, but you'll always be my first love." The room went silent, and Karen's husband, Tom, looked like he wanted to punch Steve in the face. Karen quickly took the mic back and thanked everyone for their lovely stories, subtly signaling to the DJ to start the music and end the open. The rest of the night went on, but the damage had been done, and the awkwardness. Story 7. I attended a wedding where the couple decided to have a flash mob dance as their surprise entertainment. They had been rehearsing with their friends for weeks and were really excited to pull it off. The plan was for the bride, Sarah, to start dancing with a few bridesmaids, then gradually more people would join in until the whole dance floor was filled with choreographed moves. It started off smoothly, with Sarah and her bridesmaids nailing the routine. Then, as more guests joined in, things began to fall apart. Some people hadn't practiced as much as others, and were clearly out of sync. A few guests who had no idea what was going on tried to join in, but ended up just awkwardly flailing around. The worst part came when Sarah's grandmother, who wasn't aware of the flash mob, thought it was a free-for-all dance. She jumped in, tripped over someone's foot, and fell. The music stopped abruptly, and everyone rushed to help. Thankfully, she wasn't seriously hurt, but she was shaken up and embarrassed. Sarah was visibly upset, not just because of her grandmother's fall, but also because her big surprise had turned into a chaotic mess. The mood was awkward for a while until the DJ played some crowd pleasers to get everyone back in the party spirit. Sarah and her husband Jake managed to laugh it off eventually, but it was definitely one of the cringiest moments I've seen at a wedding. Story 8. I was at my friend David's wedding where he and his bride Jenna had decided on a unique cake cutting ceremony. Instead of the usual knife, they wanted to use a small sword. It sounded cool and dramatic, and they even had a whole backstory about how it symbolized their love cutting through all obstacles. As they approached the cake, Jenna handed the sword to David with a flourish. He raised it high, grinning at the guests, and then brought it down to cut the cake. But he misjudged the angle and strength. The sword went through the cake too forcefully, causing the top tier to collapse and slide off the table, splattering icing and cake everywhere. Jenna gasped, and there was a moment of stunned silence before people started to laugh awkwardly. David, trying to salvage the situation, picked up a piece of cake from the floor and jokingly offered it to Jenna. She forced a smile but was clearly mortified. To make matters worse, the cake had been made by Jenna's aunt, who took great pride in her baking skill. She looked like she was about to cry. The rest of the cake was hastily cleaned up, and they ended up cutting a smaller backup cake with a regular knife. The incident was a huge topic of conversation for the rest of the night, and while David and Jenna tried to laugh it off, it was definitely a cringy moment that they would never forget. Story 9. At my friend Melissa's wedding, she and her fiancé, Kevin, decided to have a unity painting instead of the traditional candle or sand ceremony. They had a large canvas set up and 2 colors of paint that they would pour together to create a unique piece of art symbolizing their youth. The idea was beautiful, but the execution was far from it. As they started pouring the paint, Kevin accidentally knocked over the entire can of his paint. It splashed all over the canvas, the floor, and even onto Melissa's dress. There was a collective gasp from the guests as Melissa looked down at her paint-splattered gown in shock. Trying to save the moment, Kevin grabbed the other can of paint and poured it on, just mixed into a muddy, unappealing. Melissa forced a smile, but you could tell she was devastated. The officiant tried to lighten the mood with a joke about how their love would be colorful and messy, but the damage was done. Later, during the reception, Melissa's mother approached me and whispered, "I told them this was a bad idea." The rest of the evening was overshadowed by the painting disaster, and Melissa couldn't stop glancing at her ruined dress. It was one of those cringy moments that everyone will remember for all the wrong. Story 10. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom, Emily and Josh, decided to write and perform a song together as a surprise for their guests. Emily played the piano and sang, while Josh played the guitar. They had been practicing for months and were really excited to share this personal moment. The performance started off well enough, with Emily playing a beautiful melody on the piano. But as soon as Josh joined in with his guitar, it was clear that something was off. His guitar was horribly out of tune, creating a dissonant, cringeworthy sound that made the guests wince. Emily tried to keep singing, but Josh, realizing his mistake, stopped abruptly to tune his guitar. The awkward silence that followed was painful. Emily kept playing the piano, but her forced smile showed she was struggling to hold it together. Josh finally got his guitar in tune and they restarted the song, but the magic was gone. After the performance, Josh apologized profusely to Emily, who was clearly upset. The guests tried to be supportive, but the cringy moment hung in the air for the rest of the night. During the reception, Josh made a toast saying, "Well, we wanted to give you a memorable performance, and I think we succeeded, just not in the way we planned." Everyone laughed, but it was clear that the song fiasco would be remembered for a long time. Story 11. One time, I attended a wedding where the couple, Amy and Mike, decided to release butterflies during their outdoor ceremony. They had ordered a big box of them, and the idea was to open it after they exchanged vows, symbolizing their new life taking flight together. The ceremony was beautiful, and when the time came for the butterfly release, everyone was excited. The officiant handed the box to Amy, who opened it with a flourish. But instead of a cloud of butterflies taking off gracefully, only a few lethargic ones fluttered out, while most of them remained inside, either dead or barely moving. Amy's smile faltered as she looked at the sad, barely flapping butterfly. Mike tried to make a joke out of it, saying, "Well, I guess they're not mourning butterflies," but the moment had already turned. The guests shifted uncomfortably, and the photographers were left trying to capture what little action there was. After the ceremony, the couple was clearly upset. They had spent a lot of money on this special touch, and it had fallen flat. During the reception, Amy's maid of honor tried to cheer her up by saying, "At least it wasn't raining," which got a few laughs. But the butterfly debacle was still on everyone's mind. Story 12. At my friend Jessica's wedding, they decided to have a choreographed dance with the bridal. Jessica and her bridesmaids, and the groom, David, with his groomsmen, had spent weeks practicing. The plan was to perform a surprise dance after their first dance as a couple. The first dance went smoothly, and then the bridal party joined in. The music switched to an upbeat pop song, and they all started dancing. It was going well until one of the groomsmen, Mark, who was not exactly the most coordinated, tripped over his own feet and fell hard, taking a bridesmaid down with him. There was an audible gasp from the crowd as Mark and the bridesmaid tried to untangle themselves and get back up. The rest of the dancers hesitated, unsure whether to continue. Mark, trying to play it off, stood up and shouted, "I guess I missed a step," which got a few nervous laughs. Jessica, clearly trying to salvage the moment, waved at the DJ to keep the music going, and they finished the dance. But the magic was gone, and the rest of the performance was awkward and disjointed. At the reception, Mark apologized profusely to everyone, but the cringe-worthy fall had already become the highlight of the night's conversation. Story 13. I once went to a wedding where the bride and groom, Lindsay and Brian, decided to do something a bit unconventional. They had a roast. Yes, they thought it would be hilarious to have their closest friends and family members come up and roast them just like a Comedy Central special. The best man started off with some lighthearted jokes, and it was all fun and games. But then Brian's cousin, who had had a bit too much to drink, took the mic. He began making crude and embarrassing jokes about Brian's college days, mentioning ex-girlfriends and drunken escapades that no one really needed to hear about. The mood shifted quickly from laughter to uncomfortable silence. Lindsay's grandmother looked horrified, and Lindsay herself was visibly upset. Brian tried to laugh it off, but the jokes kept coming, each one worse than the last. The cousin didn't seem to notice the discomfort and kept going until someone finally pulled him off the stage. After that, the roast was quickly wrapped up, and the rest of the night was spent trying to recover from the awkwardness. Brian made a point to apologize to Lindsay and her family, and the incident cast a shadow over what should have been a joyous occasion. It was definitely one of the cringiest wedding ideas I've ever seen. Story 14. At my friend Tom's wedding, he and his bride Kate decided to have a dramatic entrance to their reception by arriving in a horse-drawn carriage. It was supposed to be a fairy tale moment, complete with a white horse and a beautiful carriage decorated with flowers. The guests were all gathered outside, waiting for their grand end. We could hear the clip-clop of the horse's hooves getting closer, and everyone was excited. But as the carriage rounded the corner, the horse got spooked by the loud cheers and clapping. It reared up, and the carriage swayed dangerously. Tom and Kate were thrown off balance, and the carriage nearly tipped over. The driver managed to calm the horse down, but not before Tom and Kate had to awkwardly climb out of the tilting carriage in front of all their guests. Kate's dress got caught, and she stumbled, ripping the hem. The guests' initial excitement turned to gasps of horror, and there was a tense silence as Tom helped Kate to her feet. They tried to laugh it off, but you could tell they were shaken. The rest of the night, people kept bringing up the wild ride and how it would be a story to tell for years to come. It was definitely not the fairy tale entrance they had envisioned. Story 15. I attended a wedding where the couple, Rachel and Ben, decided to do a karaoke contest during the reception. They thought it would be a fun way for guests to enjoy themselves and get involved. They set up a stage, complete with a karaoke machine and a list of songs. The first few performances were great, with guests belting out classic love songs and having a good time. But then, Ben's uncle, who was already quite drunk, decided to sing. He chose an old rock song that was entirely inappropriate for a wedding, filled with explicit lyrics and offensive language. As soon as he started, the mood in the room shifted. The DJ tried to cut the music, but the uncle grabbed the mic and kept singing a cappella. Ben and Rachel were mortified, and guests were visibly uncomfortable. The uncle finally finished his song, bowed dramatically, and stumbled off the stage. Rachel's mother, furious, confronted him, and a heated argument ensued. The rest of the evening was filled with awkward glances and whispered conversations about the incident. Ben and Rachel apologized to everyone, but the karaoke contest was quickly shut down, and the whole thing left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. It was one of the cringiest wedding moments I've ever experienced. Story 16. At my friend Lucy's wedding, she and her groom Dave decided to have a surprise fireworks display as the grand finale. They had kept it a secret from almost everyone, including most of their bridal party, to ensure it would be a spectacular ending to the night. The reception was held at a beautiful vineyard, and as the night wore on, everyone was having a great time. As the clock neared midnight, Dave signaled to the fireworks crew to start the show. The first few fireworks were stunning, lighting up the sky in brilliant colors. Everyone oohed and awed, completely captivated. But then, one of the larger fireworks malfunctioned. Instead of shooting high into the sky, it exploded close to the ground, sending sparks and debris flying. Guests screamed and ducked for cover. A small fire broke out in the vineyard's dry grass, and panic ensued as people scrambled to get away. Thankfully, the venue staff were quick to respond and managed to put out the fire before it spread. However, the damage was done. Lucy was in tears, her dream wedding ending in chaos. Dave, trying to console her, apologized profusely to their guests. The rest of the night was spent reassuring everyone that everything was fine, but the cringe-worthy fireworks mishap was all anyone could talk. Story 17. I once attended a wedding where the couple, Hannah and Jack, decided to have a live band instead of a DJ. They hired a local rock band that they loved, hoping to create a lively and energetic atmosphere. The band was known for their energetic performances and usually played in bars and clubs. Everything started off great, with the band playing some classic hits that got everyone on the dance floor. But as the night progressed, the band's choice of songs became less wedding appropriate. They started playing loud, heavy rock songs that didn't quite fit the romantic ambience Hannah and Jack had envisioned. The tipping point came when the lead singer, perhaps after a few too many drinks, started shouting out to the crowd, "Let's get this party started! Who's ready to rock?" He then proceeded to sing a song with explicit lyrics, completely inappropriate for the mixed-age crowd. Elderly relatives and young children were in attendance, and you could see the discomfort on their faces. Hannah and Jack, clearly mortified, asked the band to switch to more family-friendly music. The band complied, but the damage was done. The guests were visibly uncomfortable, and the once lively dance floor had significantly cleared out. The night ended on a more subdued note, with the cringeworthy band performance being the main topic of conversation. Story 18. I was at a wedding where the couple, Megan and Luke, decided to have a photo booth with props for guests to take silly pictures. It was a great idea, and everyone seemed to be enjoying it. They had hats, glasses, feather boas, and all sorts of fun accessories. Everything was going smoothly until one of the groomsmen, Jeff, decided to take things a bit too far. He had had a few too many drinks and thought it would be hilarious to take some naughty photos with the props. He grabbed a pair of fake breasts from the prop box and started posing inappropriately. The photo booth attendant, unsure how to handle the situation, didn't stop. The booth was set up to print 2 copies of each photo, one for the guest and one for the couple's photo album. Megan and Luke didn't realize what had happened until they looked through their photo album the next day. They were horrified to find multiple pictures of Jeff in various lewd poses. Megan's grandmother had also seen the photos when they were printed, and she was deeply offended. Megan and Luke had to apologize to their family and friends and explain that Jeff had gone rogue. The whole incident was incredibly embarrassing for everyone involved, and the photo booth mishap became the cringiest moment of their wedding. Story 19. At a wedding I attended, the couple, Amanda and Chris, decided to have a first-look photo session before the ceremony. They wanted to capture the emotional moment when Chris saw Amanda in her dress for the first time. It was supposed to be a private, intimate moment. The photographer had set up a beautiful spot in the garden, and Chris was waiting with his back turned. Amanda walked up behind him, tapped him on the shoulder, and when he turned around, his reaction was priceless. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he looked genuinely stunned. But just as the photographer was snapping away, one of Amanda's distant relatives, who had been exploring the garden, stumbled upon the scene. Without realizing what was happening, she walked right into the frame, looking confused. The photographer asked her to step aside, but the moment was already disrupted. To make matters worse, the relative, not understanding the significance of the moment, loudly commented, "Oh, is this the big reveal? How lovely!" Her voice broke the emotional atmosphere, and Amanda's radiant smile turned into a strained. The couple tried to laugh it off, but it was clear they were disappointed. The photographer managed to get a few good shots, but the interruption was a major buzzkill. At the reception, everyone kept asking about the first look, and Amanda had to repeatedly tell the story of how it was inadvertently photobombed. It was definitely a cringeworthy moment that put a damper on what should have been a magical memory. Story 20. I attended a wedding where the couple, Sarah and Jake, decided to include their beloved dog, Max, in the ceremony. Max was a large, energetic golden retriever, and they wanted him to be the ring. They even had a special tuxedo for him, and a pillow attached to his back to carry the ring. The ceremony was outdoors in a beautiful park. When it was time for the rings, Max was supposed to walk down the aisle to Jake, who would then take the rings from the pillow. But as soon as Max saw Jake, he got overly excited and bolted down the aisle, pulling the leash out of the flowers. Max ran straight into Jake, knocking him off balance. In the chaos, the pillow with the rings came loose and fell into the grass. Guests jumped up, trying to catch Max and retrieve the rings. Sarah, standing at the altar, looked horrified. After a few minutes of chasing Max and searching for the rings, they finally found them. Jake, looking a bit disheveled, tried to laugh it off and reassured Sarah that everything was fine. The ceremony continued, but the mood had shifted from serene to frazzled. During the reception, the best man made a joke in his speech, saying, "Well, at least Max didn't eat the rings," which got a good laugh, but Sarah and Jake were clearly embarrassed. The dog's runaway moment was the talk of the night, and while it was a cute idea, it definitely turned into a cringeworthy disaster. Story 21. At a wedding I attended, the couple, Emily and John, decided to have a unique unity ceremony involving their favorite drinks. Emily loved red wine, and John was a beer enthusiast, So they thought it would be fun to pour their drinks into a single glass and then take a sip together, symbolizing their unity and blending of tastes. The ceremony was held in a picturesque vineyard, and everything was going smoothly until the unity drink section. They had practiced this with water beforehand, but real wine and beer presented a different challenge. Emily and John each poured their drink into the glass, and the resulting concoction was a murky, unattractive mixture. Trying to keep the moment special, they smiled at each other and took a sip. Almost immediately, their faces contorted in disgust. The guests, unsure whether to laugh or feel concerned, watched as Emily started coughing and John made a gagging sound. They quickly set the glass down, trying to compose themselves, but the damage was done. The officiant, attempting to salvage the situation, said, "Well, not every blend is perfect, but it's the effort that counts." This got some nervous laughter from the crowd, but the awkwardness lingered. Later at the reception, John admitted during his speech, "Yeah, we probably should have tested that mix first." The unity drink fiasco became the night's main topic of conversation and a cringeworthy moment they would never forget. Story 22. One of the cringiest moments I've seen at a wedding happened at my friend Laura's big day. She and her husband Mike decided to have a destination wedding in the Caribbean. The setting was perfect, a beautiful beach with the ocean as their backdrop. The ceremony was going well until it was time for the vows. Mike had written his on a piece of paper, but the beach's windy conditions had other plans. As he pulled out his vows, a sudden gust of wind snatched the paper out of his hands and carried it into the ocean. Everyone gasped, and Mike, looking helpless, tried to chase after the paper, but it was too late. The paper was quickly soaked and unreadable. Laura, trying to stay composed, said, "It's okay, just say them from your heart." But Mike, clearly flustered, couldn't remember the heartfelt words he had written. He stammered through a makeshift version, but it was a far cry from what he had intended. The guests gave polite applause, but the moment had lost its magic. Later at the reception, Mike joked, "Well, at least my vows are one with the ocean now," trying to make light of the situation. It was a cringeworthy moment that overshadowed what should have been a perfect ceremony. Story 20. I once attended a wedding where the couple, Abby and Tom, had decided on a medieval theme. They went all out with costumes, decorations, and even a banquet-style reception. As part of the theme, they hired a group of actors to perform a jousting match as entertainment. The jousting was supposed to be the highlight of the reception. The actors, dressed as knights, rode on horseback and charged at each other with lances. It was all very dramatic and exciting until one of the knights took a particularly hard hit and fell off his horse, landing awkwardly. The crowd gasped as the knight lay there, clearly injured. The performers quickly rushed to his aid, and an ambulance had to be called. The mood shifted from festive to concerned, and Abby and Tom looked mortified. The jousting arena was quickly cleared, and the reception tried to continue as planned, but the excitement had waned. Later, Tom tried to lighten the mood by saying, "Well, I guess that's why they call it a contact sport." But the guests were still visibly shaken. The injured knight was taken to the hospital, and thankfully he was okay. But the cringeworthy incident cast a shadow over what was supposed to be a joyful celebration. Story 24. At a wedding I attended, the couple, Sarah and Jake, decided to do a wish lantern release. They provided each guest with a paper lantern to write a wish on for the couple, and then everyone would release them into the sky simultaneously. It was supposed to be a beautiful symbolic gesture. The problem started when the wind picked up just as we were about to release the lantern. As soon as the guests lit their lanterns and tried to let them go, the wind caught them, causing several to fly directly into nearby trees. Some lanterns didn't lift off at all, and instead landed on the grass, still burning. Panic ensued as guests ran around trying to stomp out the small fires that had started in the grass and trees. The romantic atmosphere was quickly replaced with chaos. The venue staff rushed to help, but it took a while to get everything under control. Thankfully, no major damage was done, but the moment was completely ruined. During the reception, Jake tried to laugh it off, saying, "I guess our wishes were a bit too hot to handle." But Sarah was clearly upset, and the guests were more focused on the near disaster than on celebrating. The cringeworthy lantern release became the defining moment of their wedding. Story 25. One of the most awkward wedding moments I've witnessed happened at my cousin Anna's wedding. She and her groom, Matt, had decided to have an elaborate cake-cutting ceremony. The cake was a towering, multi-tiered masterpiece, and they wanted to make it a grand event. As they approached the cake, everyone gathered around, cameras ready. Anna and Matt each took a knife and began to cut into the cake, but as they pulled the knife out, the top tier of the cake started to wobble. Before anyone could react, the entire top half of the cake toppled over, crashing to the floor. The guests gasped in horror, and Anna looked like she was about to cry. Matt, trying to salvage the situation, picked up a piece of the fallen cake and jokingly offered it to Anna, but she was too upset to play along. The cake was quickly cleaned up, and the rest of the intact tiers were served, but the mood had already been dampened. During the reception, Matt apologized repeatedly and made a toast, saying, "Well, at least we still have the memories and the photos of the great cake disaster." The guests laughed, but the incident remained a cringeworthy highlight of the wedding, overshadowing what should have been a perfect celebration. Story 26. I once attended a wedding where the couple, Rachel and Scott, decided to include a choreographed dance involving the entire wedding party. They had rehearsed for weeks and were eager to show off their moves. The dance was supposed to be a surprise for the guests, kicking off the reception with a bang. The music started and everything was going smoothly at first. Rachel and Scott led the way, and the bridesmaids and groomsmen followed, hitting their marks and executing the routine perfectly. But halfway through the dance, one of the bridesmaids, who had clearly had a bit too much to drink, started to lose her balance. She stumbled and crashed into the groomsmen next to her, creating a domino. The neat lines of dancers dissolved into a heap of people trying to regain their footing. Rachel and Scott, in the middle of a lift, lost their balance and nearly fell over. The music kept playing, but the dance routine had turned into a chaotic mess. The guests, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned, gave a few polite claps. Rachel, looking flustered, tried to rally everyone to continue, but the moment had already been ruined. Later, during the reception, Scott tried to make light of the situation. "Well, I guess we should stick to the slow dances," he joked, which got a few laughs. But it was clear the cringe-worthy dance mishap would be remembered as the highlight of the night. Story 27. At my friend Lisa's wedding, she and her husband Tom decided to write their own vows. They wanted to make the ceremony personal and heartfelt, so they each spent weeks crafting the perfect words to say to each other. The ceremony was held in a beautiful garden, and everything seemed perfect. When it was Tom's turn to read his vows, he reached into his pocket for the piece of paper he had written them, but instead of pulling out his vows, he accidentally pulled out a crumpled receipt. Realizing his mistake, he quickly stuffed it back in and reached again, only to find nothing. Tom's face turned red as he patted down all his pockets, realizing he had left the actual vows back at the hotel. He tried to laugh it off, saying, "Well, I guess I'll just have to wing it." The guests chuckled, but you could see the panic in Tom's eyes. He started to speak, but without his carefully prepared words, he stammered and struggled to express himself. "Lisa, I love you a lot, and I'm really happy we're here today." It was clear he was floundering, and Lisa, though smiling, looked disappointed. After the ceremony, Tom apologized profusely to Lisa and her family. During the reception, he tried to make up for it by giving a heartfelt speech, but the cringe-worthy moment of the forgotten vows had already left its mark on the day. Story 28. I was at a wedding where the couple, Katie and Brian, decided to have a live stream of their ceremony for friends and family who couldn't attend in person. They set up a camera at the front of the church to capture the entire event and hired a tech-savvy friend to manage the stream. Everything was going smoothly until it came time for the ring exchange. As Brian reached into his pocket for Katie's ring, he realized it wasn't there. He patted down his other pockets, checked his jacket, but the ring was nowhere to be found. Panic spread across his face as Katie stood there looking increasingly worried. The tech-savvy friend, who was supposed to be managing the live stream, rushed up to help search for the ring, leaving the camera unattended. In the chaos, the camera toppled over, and the live stream viewers were suddenly treated to a close-up of the floor. After a frantic few minutes, the ring was finally found. It had slipped through a hole in Brian's pocket and fallen into his shoe. The ceremony resumed, but the tension was palpable. Later, during the reception, the friend apologized for the camera mishap, and Brian joked, "I guess I really did get cold." The cringeworthy ring fiasco and the live stream blunder were the talk of the night, overshadowing what was supposed to be a seamless and beautiful ceremony. Story 29. At my friend Jenna's wedding, she and her husband Mike decided to do a unity candle ceremony. The idea was to light a single candle from two separate flames, symbolizing the joining of their lives. It was a beautiful concept, and everyone was excited to see. However, the day of the wedding was particularly windy. The ceremony was held outdoors, and despite their best efforts, the wind kept blowing out the candle. Jenna and Mike tried multiple times to get the unity candle lit, but each time the wind thwarted their efforts. The efficient, trying to keep things moving, suggested they move on and come back to it later. But Jenna was determined. She whispered to Mike, "We have to make this." After several more failed attempts, they finally managed to get the candles lit and quickly moved to light the Unity candle. Just as the flame touched the wick, a strong gust of wind blew out all 3 candles. Jenna, visibly frustrated, muttered, "This is ridiculous," loud enough for the guests to hear. There was an awkward pause, and then the efficient declared, "Well, it's the effort that counts." Later, during the reception, Mike tried to make light of the situation, saying, "I guess the wind had other plans for." Jenna managed to laugh, but the cringeworthy candle ceremony was a memorable hiccup in their otherwise beautiful. Story 30. One of the most cringeworthy wedding moments I've ever witnessed happened at my friend Anna. She and her groom Matt decided to have a traditional cake-cutting ceremony, complete with feeding each other a piece of cake. As they approached the cake, everyone gathered around, cameras ready. Anna and Matt each took a piece of the cake, but instead of gently feeding it to each other, they got a bit too enthusiastic. Matt smeared a large chunk of cake all over Anna's face, and she retaliated by doing the same to him. It quickly escalated into a full-blown cake fight. Guests watched in shock as the bride and groom, now covered in cake, laughed and smeared more icing on each other. What was supposed to be a cute and romantic moment had turned into a messy disaster. Anna's dress was stained with icing, and Matt's suit was a sticky mess. The venue staff hurried to clean up the mess, and Anna and Matt had to take a break to clean themselves up. The guests were left standing awkwardly, unsure how to react. Later, during the reception, Anna and Matt tried to laugh it off, saying, "Well, at least we had fun." But it was clear that the cringeworthy cake fight had taken away some of the magic from their special day. Story 31. I once attended a wedding where the couple, Chloe and Dan, decided to have a family blessing segment during their ceremony. They wanted their immediate families to come up, place their hands on them, and say a few words of blessing and support. It was meant to be a touching, intimate moment. Everything was going smoothly until it was Dan's mother's turn to speak. She started off well with kind words and blessings, but then she began to ramble about how she hoped Chloe would finally learn to cook and keep a tidier house now that she was married. The atmosphere shifted from touching to awkward in seconds. Chloe's face turned bright red, and you could see her struggling to maintain her composure. Dan looked mortified. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure how to react. Dan's mother continued, oblivious to the tension she was causing, until Dan's father gently pulled her away and tried to smooth things over with a more appropriate blessing. The rest of the ceremony proceeded without incident, but the damage was done. Later, during the reception, Chloe's maid of honor tried to lighten the mood with a humorous toast, saying, "Well, here's to hoping Dan's cooking skills make up for any shortcoming." Gotta laugh, but the cringeworthy family blessing was the main topic of conversation. Story 32. At my friend Alex's wedding, he and his bride, Emily, decided to include their pets in the ceremony. They had 2 adorable dogs, Max and Bella, who were to serve as the ring bearers. The plan was for the dogs to walk down the aisle with the rings attached to their collars. Everything was set, and the dogs were positioned at the end of the aisle with a handler. When the music started, the handler released the dogs, but instead of walking gracefully down the aisle, they got distracted by all the guests and the new surroundings. Max started barking excitedly, while Bella decided to chase a butterfly that had fluttered nearby. The dogs ran around the venue, ignoring commands and creating chaos. Guests were laughing and trying to catch the runaway ring bearers, but it was clear the situation was out of control. Eventually, the dogs were wrangled and the rings retrieved, but the ceremony had been completely disrupted. Alex and Emily, trying to make the best of it, laughed and shrugged it off, but you could tell they were disappointed. During the reception, Alex joked, "Well, I guess our dogs have a mind of their own." The guests laughed, but the cringeworthy pet mishap was the highlight of the evening. Story 33. I was at a wedding where the couple, Jess and Mark, decided to have a memory jar activity. They placed a large jar and a stack of cards on a table, asking guests to write down their favorite memories of the couple and place them in the jar. It was a sweet idea meant to create a keepsake for Jess and Mark to look back. The problem arose when one of Mark's old college friends, who had a bit too much to drink, decided to write a very detailed and explicit memory involving a wild party from their college. Oblivious to the context, he placed the card in the jar, thinking it was hilarious. Later in the evening, Jess and Mark decided to read some of the memories aloud. They were laughing and enjoying the heartfelt notes until they pulled out the explicit card. Jess's face turned beet red as she read the first few lines, quickly realizing what it was. She stopped mid-sentence, trying to laugh it off, but the damage was done. The guests, unsure how to react, exchanged awkward glances, while Mark's friend, realizing his mistake, tried to hide his embarrassment. Jess and Mark quickly moved on to the next card, but the cringeworthy memory had already cast a shadow over the activity. For the rest of the night, the explicit memory was the main topic of conversation, much to Jess and Mark's chagrin. Story 34. At my cousin Sarah's wedding, she and her husband, Mike, decided to have a karaoke session during the reception. They thought it would be a fun way to get everyone involved and add some entertainment. The guests were excited, and many signed up to sing their favorite songs. The karaoke started off well, with people singing classic hits and everyone having a great time. But then Sarah's uncle, who was known for his offbeat sense of humor, decided to perform. He chose a raunchy, inappropriate song that was completely out of place for a wedding. As soon as he started singing, the mood in the room shifted from festive to uncomfortable. The guests didn't know whether to laugh or be appalled. Sarah and Mike exchanged mortified glances, clearly upset by the turn of events. The DJ, trying to salvage the situation, cut the song short, but the damage was already done. Later, during the reception, Mike made a joke about sticking to love songs for future karaoke sessions, trying to lighten the mood. While some guests laughed, it was clear the cringeworthy karaoke performance had left a mark on the evening. Sarah's uncle spent the rest of the night avoiding eye contact, and the incident became the talk of the night. Story 35. I attended a wedding where the couple, Anna and Jake, decided to have a grand exit involving sparklers. They envisioned a beautiful, glittering send-off as they made their way to their get. The plan was for the guests to form a tunnel with the sparklers, creating a magical moment as Anna and Jake walked. The sparklers were handed out and lit, and everything seemed to be going well. But as Anna and Jake started their walk, someone in the crowd accidentally bumped into another guest, causing a lit sparkler to fall and ignite a small patch of dry grass near. Panic ensued as guests tried to stomp out the fire while still holding their spark. Anna, in her flowing dress, got too close to one of the sparklers and caught the edge of her gown on fire. Jake quickly patted it out, but the bottom of her dress was singed, and Anna was visibly shaken. The grand exit was cut short, and the sparklers were hastily extinguished. Anna and Jake made their way to the car, but the romantic moment had been replaced by chaos. During the reception, Jake tried to make light of it, saying, "Well, we certainly went out with a bang." But the cringeworthy sparkler mishap was all anyone could talk about, overshadowing the couple's special scent. Story 36. One wedding I attended featured a cringeworthy moment right at the start. The couple, Jenny and Mark, decided to have their dog Buster act as the ring bearer. Buster was a lovable Labrador who usually behaved perfectly, so it seemed like a great idea. The ceremony was outdoors in a beautiful park. Everything was set, and when the time came for Buster to deliver the rings, he trotted down the aisle with a little pillow attached to his collar. The guests cooed and clapped, thinking it was adorable. But as Buster reached the altar, he caught sight of a squirrel in the distance. In an instant, Buster bolted after the squirrel, rings still attached. Mark and Jenny called after him, but it was no use. Buster was on a mission. A few groomsmen and guests ran after him, but the dog was too quick. It took a good 10 minutes of chaos before they finally caught Buster and retrieved the rings. By the time they returned, everyone was a bit flustered, and the ceremony resumed with some laughter. During the reception, Mark joked, "Well, Buster wanted to add some excitement to our big day." The cringeworthy ring chase was the talk of the night, overshadowing the otherwise lovely ceremony. Story 37. At my friend Laura's wedding, she and her groom, Jake, decided to have a champagne tower as part of the reception. It was meant to be a glamorous touch, with them pouring champagne into the top glass and watching it cascade down through the tower. The guests gathered around, cameras ready, as Laura and Jake began to pour. Everything was going well until one of the guests, trying to get a better view, accidentally bumped into the table. The tower wobbled and then, in slow motion, collapsed. Glasses shattered, champagne spilled everywhere, and there was a collective gasp from the crowd. Laura looked horrified, and Jake quickly tried to reassure her. The venue staff rushed to clean up the mess, but the damage was done. During the cleanup, Laura's mother tried to make light of the situation, saying, "Well, it's good luck if something breaks, right?" But it was clear the moment had been ruined. Later, during the reception, Jake made a toast, saying, "Here's to a marriage that's as strong as our champagne tower was fragile." The guests laughed, but the cringeworthy collapse was the highlight of the evening, and everyone kept talking. Story 38. I attended a wedding where the couple, Emily and James, decided to have a live painter capture their ceremony on canvas. It was a unique idea, and the painter was set up at the back of the venue, quietly working as the ceremony took place. The ceremony was beautiful, and everyone was excited to see the finished paint. However, just as Emily and James were exchanging vows, a sudden gust of wind knocked over the painter's easel, sending the canvas and all her supplies flying. The painter scrambled to catch everything, but the canvas was smeared with paint and debris. The guests tried to ignore the commotion, but it was hard not to notice. Emily glanced back, clearly concerned, but continued with her vow. The painter, looking mortified, tried to salvage the painting, but it was clear it was beyond repair. After the ceremony, the painter apologized profusely, and Emily and James assured her it was okay. During the reception, James tried to lighten the mood, saying, "Well, we'll just have to remember this day in our hearts instead of on canvas." The cringeworthy painting mishap was the talk of the night, overshadowing the otherwise perfect ceremony. Story 39. At my cousin Jessica's wedding, she and her husband Tom decided to include a shoe game during the reception. For those unfamiliar, the game involves the bride and groom sitting back to back, holding one of each other's shoes. They are asked questions about their relationship and raise the shoe of the person who they think best fits the answer. The game started off fun and lighthearted with questions like, who's the better cook and who's more likely to be late? But then, the MC, who was Tom's cousin and known for his inappropriate humor, decided to ask, who has the worst ex? The room went silent, and Jessica's face turned bright red. Tom, trying to play along, hesitated and then raised his own shoe. Jessica, looking mortified, raised her shoe too. The guests exchanged awkward glances and the atmosphere turned tense. The MC, realizing his mistake, quickly moved on to another question, but the damage was done. Later, during the reception, Jessica's maid of honor made a toast saying, "Let's focus on the future, not the past," trying to steer the mood back to celebratory. The cringeworthy moment of the shoe game was the main topic of conversation for the rest of the night, casting a shadow over the fun of it. Story 40. I attended a wedding where the couple, Amy and David, decided to have a choreographed entrance to their reception. They had rehearsed a fun dance routine with their bridal party, and it was supposed to kick off the festivities with a bang. As the DJ announced them, Amy and David burst through the doors, leading their bridal party in a high-energy dance. Everything was going well until David, attempting a particularly ambitious move, slipped and fell hard. The guests gasped as he lay on the floor, clutching his ankle. The music stopped and Amy rushed to his side. David, clearly in pain, tried to laugh it off, but it was obvious he was hurt. The bridal party helped him to a chair, and the venue staff quickly called for medical assistance. The guests were left standing awkwardly, unsure what to do. Later, during the reception, David returned with his ankle wrapped, sitting with his leg elevated. He tried to make light of the situation, saying, "Well, I guess I shouldn't quit my day job." The guests laughed, but the cringeworthy fall had already cast a pall over the evening. The ambitious dance routine was the highlight of the night, but for all the wrong reasons.